United States had become the fourth largest supplier of marijuana on the streets in America, after Colombia, Mexico, and Jamaica. Now, in regards to New York's cannabis market during the 1980s, Jamaican weed was popular, and strains like the Acapulco Gold from Mexico were also really popular. And then strains like the Haze and later on the Sour Diesel would become the staple of New York's cannabis consumers, what they smoked. But this is where Branson really started to make a name for himself. One of the major themes in the story of Branson's cannabis career is that he always looked to have a unique offering. A unique offering meaning unique strains. See, what's really important to understand about the cannabis market in New York throughout the 20th century is that there weren't that many different options when it came to types of weed, and the way those types of weed were identified was also pretty broad. From the 1970s to the 1980s, the dominant types of weed were known in the streets as mainly from the place that it came from, right? The landrace, i.e. Thailand and Jamaica, otherwise known as the Thai or Jamaican. From the 1980s through the 1990s, there was a shift in the identification when strains like the Haze and Sour Diesel became the dominant types of weed being sold. But now, like I said earlier, this homogeneous domination of only a couple strains in New York played to Branson's favor. Because Branson would be going over to California and bringing back a variety of different strains, he would start to become known individually as one of the few people that had a unique selection of flavors. You could even say he had an exotic selection of strains. He had many different types of exotic strains in a city that had very few options. So throughout the 1980s, the Haze name, and a little later on into the 90s, the Sour Diesel name, would become famous in the streets. But also, so would the name Branson. And that, my friends, well, that's what we call a person way ahead of their time. Before cannabis legalization, the first type of brands were strains, or strands. Now, I've talked about this in countless other videos I've done, that in today's industry, the most valuable thing is brand equity, and within that being brand loyalty. And one major component to brand loyalty is having customers wanting to try any strain that brand is selling. You want customers to be loyal to your brand and not a specific strain. Now, in the mid to late 1980s, Branson made another move that helped separate himself from the pack, which was his implementation of these unique triangle-shaped bags. He would come across a bag supplier that allowed him to order a customized bag that was shaped in a triangle. This made it so it was undeniably identifiable that it was weed coming from Branson. And this is why I say Branson was absolutely ahead of his time. People were loyal to Branson, not specific strains, and he had unique packaging that gave him more brand identity. Now, just like any market over time, in the 1990s, the overall drug market changed. Whether it's Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign in the late 80s, or Stop and Frisk in New York during the 1990s, and overall the launching of the war on drugs, the illegal drug trade changed, including cannabis. So Branson, like he has always, adapted. He made connections in the entertainment industry and actually managed Devontae Swing, who was a member of the famous R&B group Jodeci, as well as some other rappers over a time period. So Branson had connections to the music industry in New York, and with the changes in the New York cannabis market in the 1990s, he pivoted to mainly supplying exotic strains of high-quality cannabis to the people in the entertainment and music world. Now, just like Branson had in the 70s and 80s, he treated his customers well, always having great customer service. People would come to him and they'd buy their kush, but they'd also hang out for a while after. Branson treated his customers like friends, because the majority of them were. And this translated extremely well over to when he started supplying famous musicians and rappers in the 1990s. If you were to ask Branson today about people like the famous rapper Notorious B.I.G., otherwise known as Biggie Smalls, he would tell you that he was a friend before anything. So this combination of great customer service and a wide selection of exotic strains made Branson New York hip-hop's favorite cannabis plug. And inherently, musicians and rappers talk about people and their experiences that they have in their life. So organically, many of the rappers would start to name Branson and his exotic flavors.
Branson, get a 50 jug or two, hit Branson.
Hey, yo, it's very rare that you
see me and Lansing in the club with Bub, party and we dancing. If so, it's Chris, Bacardi and some Branson.
Boss's rule. I had the Branson in the jars, hoes handsome in the car.
Yeah, it's your boy Kiss. You know I'm still a liquor and the weed child. Still got Branson on speed dial. And everybody.
I'm rolling with the 40 pack of niggas. Get my weed from Branson, cause this sack's bigger. Me and my nigga Lance took him and C's advance. Bought 10 bricks, 4 pounds of weed plants from Branson.
Like, shout out to my man Branson.
He wait up in front of their house, you know what I'm saying? So I didn't even know, salute the blood too, because we would go to Blood Mural and hang out. This was Branson days when we were smoking the Branson. You know what I'm saying? The pyramid bags and all that. Ooh, salute to the God. I just got a chill on my body. I just got a chill on my body.
So you show up 94. This is Ready to Die, the album. Talk to me about the process. Like, what was it like during the making of that album?
Shit was fun, dog. Shit was fun as fuck, man. I mean, we was out the streets. This one, it was real. Contract signed, deal on the table. We got some advance money. You know what I'm saying? It's more liquor now. We done made the transformation from beer to liquor. You know what I'm saying? It went from, just regular green weed to Branson. You know, things started to change.
In my opinion, I think Branson is one of the first cannabis entrepreneurs to be really embraced by hip-hop and to be constantly mentioned by rappers of the 1990s, 2000s, and beyond. While the hundreds, maybe even thousands of mentions of Branson and his weed throughout New York's rap songs was a pretty organic happening, I think it showcased the power of marketing strains and brands through music. Now, just like I talked about in the High Design History episode I did on Champelli on the West Coast, the infusion of cannabis brands or strains into music, like what happened with Branson on the East Coast, laid the bedrock or served as a precursor to what we see now with people like Berner and his Cookies cannabis empire. So it was pretty dope to see last year when Berner came to New York and said this in an interview with The Breakfast Club.
I'm coming to New York for sure. We're putting all our resources into bringing Cookies to New York, but what we're going to do is